Brian Galivan, welcome back to the show, dude. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So dude, catch everybody up kind of. So you're always an interesting case to kind of have on our show, obviously, because of the fact that, well, you just finished telling me about your son and everything going on with that. So we'll leave that the way it is. But more importantly, man, you get to work with a team that's extremely static, right? Like in a sense where they're always moving. There's different tournaments, there's different crossovers and leagues and all that stuff. So I figured, like, something we've been getting our athletes asking a lot about right now, and even just general people we work with kind of like on a wellness side, is kind of asking for the whole training in the middle of a season and kind of refreshing things sometimes and power outputs and this and that. So I figured there's nobody better kind of to like bring on other than yourself, because you have a lot of good experience with that. So dude, kind of just teach us what you follow for a basic rule, if you will, of like in-season training. You're getting into kind of, for hockey players, I guess, the second half of the season, right? So it's like, what do we value right now? Like, what do we really got to put some emphasis into, in your opinion?
That's a good question. And right now, second half, the amount of games kids play now, I mean, especially at like AAA level where, you're between 16 and 18, you have those
Yeah.
five, 6 games in 2 days, and is strength, right? I mean, that's a huge drop off this time of year. I think, in the past, we've probably been a little bit of afraid of lifting this time of year.
Yeah,
Kind of the more old school thought. But that's, it's probably even more important. The strength is your prerequisite for power, right? Power is your prerequisite for speed. You start losing strength, and the other two are just going to go. So,
I feel you.
Recovery doesn't necessarily always mobility and but sometimes, especially with our like AAA teams we work with, not just NTDP, but come in on a Monday, and if we can get some volume in, we'll do it. It doesn't have to be like a summer workout where it's like a 5x5 or whatever, but just a full body lift and trying to maintain that strength that they gain in the summer. And I think we've been pretty, especially with NTDP, getting to kind of test a lot of different ways of training the last couple of years. There's weeks where we'll lift 3 times, but like our 18s, for instance, with their schedule, I think we've only gotten about 7 or 8 in the last 3-4 weeks with the Christmas break.
Really?
And so it's just really maintenance, right? Trying to maintain. But I think for youth, like you can make gains during the year. It's they're at an age where they can do those kind of things. So I think it's just
100%.
Maintaining is a big one.
I feel it, man. And then you said, so like kind of more so raw power, or sorry, strength is what you're talking about. So for anybody tuning in, because we do have a couple, younger viewers, especially when we have episodes geared towards obviously strength and conditioning sides and such. I'm not going to ask you to prescribe rep ranges because I know that it's something that's individualized, but I will ask you, man, like if you're looking to kind of give a basic rule of thumb in regards to lifting for strength, I mean, somebody that doesn't really know it, what are you going to teach them?
Yeah, I guess the rep range is pretty simple for that one. It's 6 to 8, but it does kind of, I think it's you need to kind of evaluate the gym IQ and the level you're working with. I think how we train tier 2 kids is a little different than we'll train tier 1 and vice versa. So,
sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, like you're, I guess, a lower level athlete, right? Like your tier 2 kids. I mean, some of our tier 2 teams don't play as many games, and during the season we lift a ton.
Right.
But I think a lot of it is just dependent on how much they're playing, and what they can get in. But I guess if you're asking kind of a general rule, 3-4 sets of a 6 to 8 rep range is pretty.
Totally.
Yeah. And in season with hockey, it's always full body,
Okay. So this is actually one that's very, very interesting, because we put up like a question thing and had some viewers kind of go in. We have a player that asked 2 things. So first question I'll ask you got a player who's adapting to a new league, better levels, gets told mid-season by the coach, you're not fast enough, you need to start building speed. This is right. Like that, first off, that's my response. I'm like, like, come on, pal. Like that's in the middle. It's usually a middle summer thing, but like, what do you advise on players are getting kind of put into that situation? Because I feel like that happens a lot more frequently than people kind of bring up at times, where it's like, yeah, there's a league jump. I mean, maybe they didn't do as good as they should have in the summer. Like, how do you adapt that? Like, how do you build power in the middle of a season, for example?
Oh man, that's tricky. Yeah, and I mean, I've had the coaches tell me that, like,
yeah,
hey,
right.
I need to get faster. I'm like, oh, Okay. You know, you got to get them on the speed ladder. I think coaches kind of make that mistake sometimes where, you know, working on speed ladders and sprints are going to make a kid quicker. I mean, I think how that can help you during a season is more coordination. Like if I have a really uncoordinated player, we'll work on some things like that. And sometimes that can translate to the game. Sometimes it doesn't. But I really think a big part of that is strength. I mean, especially for the young kids. And, you know, I think we've talked about this before. I think there's a lot of bad information out there,
Right.
and people want to do the cool things they see on Instagram. And I think coaches, you know, tend to see that and want the same thing. But, you know, when you're playing that many games and practicing that hard, it's kind of hard to do that during the year, but you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think with NTDP, it's, you know, we get our strength workouts in, but we're always going to have a power workout.
Right.
And typically a power or speed workout before a game where we're moving weight and we're moving it fast, you know, at high velocity. We're also able to do that. You know, not everyone has, you know, we program that into their programming. So I guess if strength coaches are listening, that's what we do.
I like that.
And we program that in. And I think for the youth, and we do that with our, you know, we work with CompuWare, we work with the Chicago Jets in Chicago, and we do the same thing with those young teams. You know, I think it's more changing the exercise selection to, you know, fit the level of athlete you're working with. You know, you can make gains during the year. You can get faster, but I think the coach to, you know, put pressure on a kid like that at middle of the season, that's definitely difficult. You know.
Okay. So this is a great perspective. And like, let me catch you there. You're a strength coach, obviously working with a lot of different populations, teams, and so on. If you had to actually give a message to the coach who's tuning in and listening to this at all, you're a strength coach. How do you see it? I know we just kind of explained your viewpoint, but like, what are your pointers then to a coach, let's say, who has a player who needs to get quicker? But I mean, realistically, the demands in the middle of a season, I'm going to let you take that away, but it's tough to do that, right? So, like, what are you going to advise a coach on, for example, a team coach, if they have a player who's trying to get faster? Like, I mean, preaching patience. Like, what are we doing here? Because I feel like this is a problem that a lot run into, you know?
Yeah, especially in a game too, where speed now is such a priority, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's a huge commodity in hockey. You know, I guess I'm really lucky to work with some really good coaches where we work together. And I
Mhm.
think the pace of practice also, you know, can really determine what type of player you're getting in games.
Yeah.
And, you know, I watch you know, I have two kids playing now, one tier one, one tier two, and watching their pace of practice. Like, if, you know, when you practice slow, you play slow.
Hmm.
And I think we're, you know, with NTDP, we're pretty lucky to have coaches that understand that. And again, we work together on it, right? But like a day before a game, like we don't practice soft. We practice
Yeah.
really hard. We just don't do it for 2 hours, right?
Yep.
And we kind of rev guys up before games. And we do the same thing at international tournaments. Like when we go international, there's no day off. I
Hmm.
mean, unless there's a situation where we need to have a mental day. But I think, you know, in season, the strength coach's job is to do the best they can to give the coaches what they want. And if you can make gains of the player, great, you know, but in the end, you know, what's happening in the sport is happening on the ice, not in the gym. So, you know, I guess advice to coaches is kind of look at how I think we should look at how we practice. And I think, especially in college, we're so used to everybody wants to be fresh on the weekends.
Hmm.
You know, these are kids, like these are not NHL players, you know, and they can take a lot and they
Yeah.
can take a lot of volume. They recover quicker. And I think the teams that practice fast and practice with pace tend to do better. But it's just, you know, how you manage the volume, right? Volume
I like
versus
that.
intensity, you know? So I think in college, the trend, at least that I've seen, is, you know, they want everybody tapers, right? You taper for the
Right.
week, you can be fresh on the weekends, and then you have this slow team on the weekend for that first game, and then they'll win the second game. And
Yeah.
I'm not understand why. Well, college is an easy schedule. You play 2 games. You want to
Hmm.
be fast, practice fast. It's just kind of changing how you do it throughout the week. And I see that in the youth too. You know, we have to do
Interesting.
these light, easy practices before games. Games are hard, right? We want to
Right.
practice, and games typically are easier. That should be easier than practice. You're not out there the whole time.
A
You're
hundred
out there
percent.
for 8, 12 minutes. So, you know, get after it, but just manage the volume, right? Small area games. Like I always would recommend ending practice with some kind of compete, like an intense drill. Just don't do it for 20 minutes, do it for
Yeah.
4 or 5 minutes and
Well,
rev those
man,
kids up the day before.
and I was gonna say what actually really I can relate to with that, especially doing on the mental side that we do, is like you've got we face a scenario all the time, especially with college players that are going into a weekend. And it's like, man, my practice week was really good on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And it's like Thursday, Friday, I took it easier. I did my skills. And then Saturday I felt flat. And it's like, yeah. Right. And it's like, it's interesting, man, because all this stuff, we don't do anything in regards to strength and conditioning. Like that's not our side, but it's like, we feel the effects, right? Like we feel the effects of the strength coach. We feel the effects of the stuff going on at home just as equally. Like all of it plays a role. And that's interesting to me because I feel like a lot of people, maybe that's even an old myth to bust as well, right? Like you were talking about earlier on, where it's, oh, don't lift during the season. But it's like, I feel like a lot of people get into that rhythm of, don't push it the day before a game, take it easier, take skills, da 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 da. And it's kind of interesting to hear that because it's funny, man. Like I feel like teams try to listen to their strength coaches. I feel like teams try to listen to their mental coaches. I feel like very few actually implement at times that they need to. Which kind of leads me into the next question that one of our guys had, or one of the viewers had, which is like, you're in the middle of the season, you're trying to recover, you're trying to do what you have to do. And then you get told you got to build better, conditioning in that sense. And it's like, is it a volume thing as well? Like, I know it sounds basic, but to a lot of our viewers, it's complex to them. So like break it down for us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, energy systems is a big one, and that's something, that's tricky, right? Like
Yeah.
when you're playing a lot of games, you're playing a lot of minutes, and typically, I hope at the youth level, the minutes are pretty balanced, hopefully, then you're not sitting kids.
Development
Um,
101, right?
but we're challenged with that too. We try to get a little extra conditioning in whenever we can. Um, hockey, I think it's hard on the hips, right? So
Yeah.
we're not doing line drills and things like that in our practices. It's all based on intensity. Like we practice really, really hard all the time. And I think you need to get as much of that on the ice as possible. But if you are a player that, that's suffering from, some, conditioning, your coach wants you want that extra gear, how you manage that in season and not overtraining is important. We typically will do, short sprint, whether it's alactic or lactic work on a bike, just because, or sleds is pretty another one to use, sleds and ropes, but things that are safe, right? We're
Right.
not doing a lot of sprinting. We typically stay off the treadmill. So if you
Sorry.
can
And
get it
just
in, great. But if
to
it's hard
catch
to
you
do,
there,
yeah.
lactic versus alactic. Teach our viewers what you mean by that.
Basically like lactic, if you're looking for the next gear, like a lot of burn, like heavy hard intervals, and then like your short repeated sprints. So
Got
just
ya.
two different energy systems, two ways of training.
100%. Okay. So then let me ask you this, because I think this is a good one to kind of lead into. I guess you could say some like red flags that you see or have seen some coaches make in that sense. Could be strength coaches, could be, team coaches in the middle of a season in regards to like trying to build this stuff that we just talked about. If you had to kind of blow the whistle on a couple of those, what would you say that they are?
Can you repeat that question one more time?
So
Sorry.
basically, like the do not do's of a coach in the middle of a season, trying to get their team fit, trying to get their team strong, trying to get their team resilient in that sense physically. Like, what do you see kind of common mistakes, if you will?
Man, that's a good one. I mean, I've only really been with the team for like 3 years, so and I'm with the best team, so I haven't seen a lot of I don't really have a really good answer for that. I definitely, you know, uh, that's tough. I mean, the coaches I have are so good at what they do. I think when I got to NTP, that was kind of the crazy thing. I was like, man, we use we have a load management system, right? We're really lucky.
Okay,
We
let's
have
talk about that.
a pretty fancy equipment, and all it really showed us in the beginning, because we didn't know much about it, was like, man, these guys are really good at what they do. I think it's, I guess the big deal is not, knowing your team and kind of not. I would never want to tell a coach how to coach and how to
Sure.
practice. More give advice, but just managing your volume. Like if these kids play 5 games, like the big thing I see with AAA is these huge tournaments, right? They play so many games in the
That's
weekend.
right. Yeah.
It's, how you manage your Monday, Tuesday is important, and not overdoing it. I don't see a ton of groin injuries anymore. I think
Hmm.
that's something that's kind of you know in the past, just because we're pretty good at managing the hips now.
Sure.
More of the, the shoulders and like impact contact injuries is, I think, more what you're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have any like major don't do's for the kids. I think you need to get after them, man, all the
I
time.
like that.
I think, I guess this would be a good one. Don't undertrain your kids. Like, they're kids, they're 14, 15.
Sure.
If I did the things that I do with my, my pro guys in the summer with NTDP, like I would get fired. Like, they would never know care of me. Like, these kids can do so much and they can take so much. They can, they're, I think from 17 to 25, those are like your peak years, right? Like, you
Sure.
just got hormones flowing through your body, like you recover faster. You're even with the sleep, you don't sleep as
Yep.
much, and that's okay. You can still get after it. Like, if I don't have a good night of sleep, I'm a mess. I think undertraining, I wouldn't be worried about undertraining. I think a big don't do either would be, don't be afraid for these kids to lift.
So,
I
man,
still run into coaches like that.
I was gonna say, dude, so like what's the threshold there? Like, what are your rules of thumb, cutoff points, like anything like under training, you'll say, like, what do you mean by that? Because I also know we got some juggernauts that'll tune in and run them till they puke. I know that's wrong, but
Yeah.
like what do you look to? Like, what are your basic kind of principles you have behind that? Because I think that's something not talked about enough, to be honest with you, which is like under training a kid, and it's like
For
it's
sure.
important.
And we do a lot of it. I think, like, we work with CompuWare, so with one organization that has tier
Hmm.
1 and tier 2. I think these kids can lift 3 days a week, all day, no problem. And it's just how you're doing it, right? If you're crushing them on a Thursday with, 10 by 10 or something ridiculous, like, yeah, they're going to get hurt. But,
Hmm.
if you spread, like with NTDP, we actually lift less, but spread it out throughout the week, and we're getting way better results. We work with some
Interesting.
some NHL guys right now too that aren't necessarily, the most powerful players. And we got them lifting, some of them pre-game, short volume, just as like a charge to warm up. And they're really maintaining what they built over the summer. I think we definitely undertrain our youth for sure. Specifically with hockey, I can't really speak for football,
Hmm.
but I think football is also kind of they spread the groundwork for all of us, right?
For
Like,
sure.
those guys lift all week long,
Yeah,
and
man, that's true.
build and build and build and build and build.
And they're
You know,
trucks.
they're trucks, and we can do the same thing. It's just, but you can't, if you don't set the foundation in training camp and kind of start that throughout the season. I think there's a couple of junior teams that do a really good job of this. I think coaches, don't be afraid to sacrifice a little in the beginning of the year. Like, get after it. If you like you talked, we were talking about conditioning. Like,
Hmm.
you got to build that gas tank in September and October. And are you going to sacrifice in the games a little bit? Maybe, maybe not
Hmm.
100% in the games, but if you can manage that and get through those early months, you're going to have a way better team the second half of the year. You know,
Interesting.
you gotta build that tank at the beginning of the year. That's what we've learned from load management. That's something, probably don't want to get too into today, but we it's just a rabbit hole you can go down. But when we use that we don't use load management as a tool to train less. We use it as a tool to train more,
For
and just
sure.
monitoring load. I think in 5, maybe even 10, maybe less than that, maybe like 4 or 5 years, I think you're going to see the technology get to the point where kids are going to be able to do that themselves, not
Totally.
necessarily monitoring heart rate and HRV anymore, but tracking their load and seeing where they're at. But you got to build that foundation early. It's just, I think coaches tend to, at least I've seen it at the youth level, we got to work on systems and all this stuff.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, you do. They
Hmm.
definitely need to do that. But what's the priority, right? Like, coming out of training camp, you need to build a gas tank so they can run
Yeah.
through walls. And I think starting to phase in that, like the 17 team, right? Like, we
Yep.
lose, we get our butts kicked, and for an entire year. In the beginning, in the first 2 months, is really hard for them. They've never seen anything like this. We lift
Yeah.
before practice, after practice, we're running, we're doing it, all kinds of crazy hill sprints, and they're all the throwing up stuff, right? You're talking about all the overtraining, but we
Yeah.
do it early, and you can see the difference in them 2 months later. And there's
Well, for
there's junior
sure.
teams that do a good job of this too. I think the Chicago Steel do a really good job with their players. I only know the USHLs. Like, Waterloo does a really
Hmm.
good, they have a great strength program. But I think that comes to communication, like you're talking about, mental and coaches
Mhm.
and strength coaches working together on it.
Well, and man, it's funny that you say that too, because, looking at all of these, first thing I'll say, like, I know we work with a football, a soccer team. And one of the biggest things in preseason that they said they do is, and we've witnessed it, is like put them through the grind, get it done, and just build it. Like, it's for us. I'm a soccer background. I used to be a pro goalkeeper, and it's like preseason and just absolutely getting beat down was 101. Like, that was like year after year, right? And it's like we're not talking like we never really slugged heavy weights per se, but it was like the running part, like the whole kind of reps around the field, the sprints, this, that, the training, the two a days. Like, that for us was like preseason. It's like, yeah, expect that. And it's like, expect to be away from your family, expect to be miserable when you are around your family, because chances are it's a stimulus that you haven't seen in a long time. But it's like, you look at some of these players and they're built like machines. Like, I know at the end of a preseason, I always felt like I was a machine, always. And it's like, it sucked, but it set me up for the rest of the season. I used to get very rarely I would have injuries pop up. Right. And it's like, that's tough. What I wanted to talk about, though, what you said, that was a great line, actually, about using load management to train more. I love that, because it's kind of like we do our profiling here. And it's like, we're not profiling to say who's weak. We're profiling to see who can take more, who can handle a little bit more challenge this week. That's what's going to push them. Like, we always talk about it, right? Challenge outside of the comfort zone is what pushes people. And it's like, yeah, but how do you define that? And more importantly, how do you pulse that regularly? Because, like, I feel like there's a major element that, yes, we talk about it, that physical training has on the mental side, but it's, dude, like, I've seen kids go into a weight room before mentally who are defeated because of something going on and walk out feeling like an absolute monster. Right. And it's like, I feel like that's not often taken into account as much on the holistic side of an athlete, where it's like there is that mental stimulus that happens. Just like with us, I'm sure you've seen a kid walk into, a situation feeling like crap, have a good talk with some kind of a therapist or coach or something in some way. And it's like they come out beaming. Like, it all kind of plays into each other. So I want to kind of go down slightly, and then we'll talk about, the second half of season stuff in a second, but load management on that. Like, what do you guys, if you're a coach and you're looking at kind of different variables and you want to see with your team and so on, and you're trying to understand how to best manage these players, what do you want to look at the most? Like, let's talk about a high tech piece of equipment you could potentially use. And then even for people that have no equipment, like, how can you kind of naked eye it at sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, you could do an RPE where you like a questionnaire. I know a lot of like teams have done those
Love
things
it.
in the past where, you pick 5 or 6 questions. How'd you sleep? How'd you eat?
Yep.
How do you just generally feel? How was your energy in the weight room? And the Excel obviously is a pretty amazing tool, and you can kind of build it on there. We did it
Sure.
for a little while. We stopped doing it just because I feel like we ask our players to do a lot, NTDP
Yes.
grind, and to ask them to do another thing on top of that. I don't know. We weren't using the information that much. But I
Mhm.
definitely think they're valuable. Just for us within the culture we had, it wasn't the best thing for the last couple of teams. But I definitely think it's something we'll incorporate in the future. That just need to make it a little easier.
Yeah,
Because
man.
with COVID and everything, we had to wake up and do these COVID questionnaires. And again, it's only my fourth season, right? So we're all right. Well, here, do your COVID questionnaire. Now you got to do it.
Yeah, man.
But it is a cheap thing to do. You can find. I can't build it on Excel because I'm terrible at computers, but my head strength coach can. Um, but for low, heart rate monitor is a really cheap, easy way to monitor heart rate. But for a team, you need a team system. Those are a little more
Yeah.
expensive. But then all that stuff is for nothing if you're not using the data. It's kind of like testing in camp. Like we're
Yes.
testing constantly. And that's a big question I get, like, what tests do you do? Like, we've thrown tests out, and the NHL combine's even done the same thing. Like, they've kind of
Yeah.
stripped it down and done some more bare bones type testing. They used to test all kinds of things, but they weren't
Mhm.
using the information. And picking tests that you will use the information. But for whoops are pretty common in the gym now. Like, not a lot of my guys wear whoops because we have a load management system. But I've had players. I think anything that engages you in your training, do it. If you want to
Good
monitor your
call.
sleep, do it. Wear
Yeah.
wear the- wear the whoop. Marcus Kruger. I worked with Marcus Kruger and Johnny Oduya long before they retired, and they had the Aura ring before anybody had it, and they would track everything. I think that's important. If it engages you, then do it. I'm a little more old school. Like I I don't wear a Whoop or a heart rate monitor or anything, but for load management, they are getting cheaper. Like Achieve is a good company you could look into that has worked with youth teams and done a lot of studies with youth teams. So
Interesting.
the technology is it's coming to youth hockey. It's been there. It just needs to get out more. But those things, and I've seen this with junior teams. I've seen it with NHL teams. Like get these systems because they have to, and universities too. Like a lot of universities have Catapult, this GPS tracking system.
Yep, totally.
Probably had that on. Some teams use it, some teams don't. If the coaches and the sports science department or the athletic trainers, whoever's doing the data management, or they're not communicating about it, it's not worth doing. Like it's something.
Yes.
If you add, you need to be working together. We've had a lot of success with it because my coaches wanted to do it, and I said, I'm like, we can do this, and I can use this for return to play and just track things, or we can do it together, and we can hammer these kids.
Yeah, totally.
And that's what we've done, and we educate our players on what it is. We show them their scores. We show them every week. And what's cool with load management, we use accelerometers, so they're getting actual movement. Right. In hockey, it was like a GPS system where they're kind of just tracking speed. So for hockey, I think it's a much more relevant piece of technology. And then we get heart rate and HRV. We only really use heart rate and HRV for return to play. Unless there's some anomaly, something going on with the kid.
Sure.
We really just do everything based on load. And we've gotten to the point now where we give the coaches a recommendation for like a practice plan for the week, and with the goal in mind of trying to build for the long term for the whole season. And the cool part, I was really fortunate to get to work with Seth Appert and John Wroblewski, who are some pretty hard hitting, heavy coaches, man. Like they're intense guys. And my first time I gave it to them, I was like, here, man. They looking at it and they're like, wait, you want me to go hard the day before the game? Wait. They're like, okay, cool. I think it's how you communicate it with the coaches is as important as doing it, because if they look at it, if they see it's, oh, this guy's trying to take something away, well then that's not going to work. And then there was days where I would show it and they'd be like, nope, we're not doing this. I'm killing them today. We need a coach. Okay,
go nuts.
I think coaches need to understand, if you go in there guns blazing, well, they're not going to want to do it then, right? It's got to be something where you work together, but it shouldn't take away. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is like all this technology, all this stuff shouldn't take away from just the old school coaching. Right? And you still need to know your team and know your players. And you get so wrapped up. There's so much data now, right? Some teams operate their whole organization off analytics, right? Like there's so much of that. The culture side to me is so much more important.
It's like us so too, because being able to get into that whole profiling side, like it was a blessing and a curse, right? It's like you've got some coaches that want to know absolutely everything, and it's like, okay, let's pretend you do know everything. Let's pretend you know everything you potentially need to know about your player. It's like, what are you doing with it? Like what do you realistically, like what change have you made that's substantial that these players are like, wow, you know what, that was a game changer? Like we've had so many conversations too with the whole Whoop and Aura and all this. And it's like some players, they have their teams, making them use it per se. And it's being on the mental side, like realistically, we have players that come to us and get anxious about it. It's like, what if my sleep scores suck? What if my recovery sucks? What if coach sees that? Does it get back to them? And it's like, yeah, but like, are they using that? Like, is it really something there? So it's interesting to say, man, because I feel like for anybody, and we won't go too deep down this rabbit hole because it is a rabbit hole, but like getting into the whole load management and that data side, if you're not well versed, like you're saying, and you don't know exactly what you're using a piece of data point for, in my opinion, I don't think there's a point to it, because it's like you kind of just burden the player. And even the point, man, that you brought up too, of like having to really use this stuff to better understand your players, and really not like coaches might just throw it out at the end of the day. That's a great point. Like to have the autonomy and have kind of the forefront to say, I'm going to throw this away today and just go off my gut. That's important, because then when you do have the organizations that use every piece of data point and drive an organization that way, there is error in that. Like, I don't care what anybody says, man. We sure you've been on that side too, where you've seen it. I've definitely seen it before in the old school profiling days, dude, where I remember when they came up to us 4 years ago and we started our profile, people were like, oh, we have sit down interviews and we can tell you everything we need to know about a player. And it's like, really? That's interesting, because I know that I can learn about somebody the day before and they have some kind of traumatic experience happen the night after, and it changes them fully as a human being. Right. So it's like, it's just interesting to see how all this will adapt, not to get more data points, man, for any of the geeks tuning in, but like to see how people utilize this stuff more effectively. That's what's interesting to me. Like, I would love to see baselines of like, okay, this is too much for the daily wellness questionnaires, for example, that I see a lot of people use. And this is how frequently you need to check in. So it's interesting, man. It all comes back to volume, like you mentioned at the start of this, right? It's like volume physical, volume mental, volume like monitoring. It's interesting stuff. Totally.
And you need to be, I think, coaches too, like if you're going to implement this stuff, man, you better be ready to have your ego checked, because it'll show you you're wrong.
Yep.
And like the load management, like it'll show, like we have, intensity scores, right? Individual, so the players can compete with themselves. And if, everybody's consistently, 0.8, that's 80% of their max, right? Well,
Totally.
there could be something going on the coaching side, right? Where the whole team's like that. I've had a case with a player individually where he was just consistently below 90%. And I showed it to him. And I'm like, hey, I'm not knocking you. I don't know what's going, because he was also an elite skater. So in hockey, you have to factor that. If you can skate, you don't necessarily have to work as hard.
Yeah.
But what's cool with their scores is they're competing against themselves. And I'm like, I think you got more in your tank. And sure enough, the next day he goes, how was my score? Well, our system crashed. So I couldn't show it to him. But 2 days later, so for 2 days, he's asking me, and I finally show him. He hit like a 0.93, and I'm like, so it was cool. It was a cool way to do it. But same for me as a strength coach. Like we use a force deck to test all our players. Like I was doing things wrong for a long time. I really was. Like my head strength coach, Will, is a brilliant young guy, and like he's kind of taken over the program this year. He earned it, and our players are faster. We have guys' power numbers going up, and we're kind of lifting less.
Mm-hmm.
And if I would have had this tool 10 years ago, I think Vinny Laverty and Mike may have fired me. Because I definitely made them slower at some point. So all this stuff they're great tools, but I think it could scare a coach a little bit too. Because like, wait a minute, what I'm doing might be wrong.
Totally, man. Well, dude, even when coaches come up to us and we profile a kid and they're like, oh, this kid's super confident. And then we profile them and it's like, brother, their decision making and their confidence and their self-assessment, lowest scores in the test. Like, no, I know this player. It's like, yeah, but that's how you subjectively feel about the player. It's not how he or she feels themselves, right? So it's just so interesting, man, because I feel like we're getting to a point now in this whole world of like sports science or performance or even just human optimization where it's like there's a lot of tools. There's a lot of tools that are out there. And being able to find now like that exact pinpointed piece of what will bring you the most return, I think is going to be one of the most interesting conversations to have over the next 5 years, to be honest with you. I really do.
If I could give advice to if you're a small gym owner like we are, like we're a small business and we started adding technology probably 4 or 5 years ago, I would highly recommend like do one thing a year. We added my one strength coach, Juan Gonzalez, he's with Rockford now, and he wanted to add Moxie monitors, which it's something he wanted to do. We added it. The next year we got a force deck. We added that. It's just stack one thing at a time, because there's a lot of you got to learn how to use it, right? And you may get down the road and not be like, all right, this thing stinks, and if you're not implementing it, it's not worth it. But for a company, I think it's important to just be careful how much of it you add, like what you just said. There's so many things,
Dude, it's like, and the thing is too, there's so many, it's kind of like the athlete that you give them all the resources and they don't do it. It's the same thing for a business, right? It's like you have so many different resources. It's just, if you're not going to use it, don't buy it. Like, right. don't even bother, because then it overwhelms you. So it's an interesting
about the Whoop scores, because I've had players do that.
Yeah.
You're like,
totally.
I great, and my score's down. I'm like, and it messes with them.
So, yeah, man. And it's like, dude, I'm telling you, man, there's so many. And then there's a couple companies out there that I know our players have worked with, and or even like our execs that we work with. And it's like, okay, I'm getting this blood testing done and they're coming here and here and here. And it's like, but man, the onboarding for this is so friggin' hard. Like, it's just a lot of work. And it's like at the end of it, what I used to get excited about, I'm not excited about it anymore. And it's like, man, there's a very interesting peak I'm starting to find too. And we preach this a lot, that part of high performance is fulfillment. If you have a happy athlete, a happy CEO, kid, parent, whatever it is, they're going to perform really well. That's part of it. It's and preparing yourself. And it's like, man, if you get all these data points and you have to sign them up and the whoop score and this score, any score for it, and it's just, it becomes a hassle, man. And it takes the complete enjoyment part away of trying to tweak yourself to become one of the best versions that you possibly can. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
I agree.
it's just interesting, you. But anyways, to wrap this up, so let's talk about it very quick. A couple major takeaways. You're talking to a kid. He's trying to get fitter in the off season. Just recap it for, or sorry, in the in season. Recap it for us. Like, what major points you're saying? Stick to strength. What other couple things you have? Watch your volume.
Yeah, watch your volume, strength train, and take care of your hips. We didn't talk about mobility, but
Good
mobility is
call.
huge. FRC and LDOA are two things that have been game changers for
Hmm.
my players that we work with all over. So, different players need different things. But those are two really good things. Just take care of your body, and then nutrition and sleep. A
For
lot of
sure.
teams, coaches want to like, oh, you got to do something after the game. You should have a habit and some sort of routine, but I think the biggest thing is eat and go to bed. All this stuff's for nothing if you're not taking care of yourself from a nutrition standpoint. That's the number one thing probably to look at in season if you're having some issues. Well, how are you eating? That
Yeah.
may not necessarily
Good
be a
call.
weight bearing thing. If you're not fueling right and you're not sleeping, then you're not going to perform the best. So
Well, even for our side, people will come to us and say, "Oh, I can't focus." It's like, have you checked your nutrition first?
yeah,
What? No, it's a mental thing. No,
okay,
it's not. You're looking pale walking in here, kid. Like, I think you
yeah,
got a bit of a nutrition issue. You know what I mean? So
yeah. I
it's
get
just, it all
vitamin
plays
D.
in.
Vitamin D
Yeah,
is a big one we put our players on during the season. I think
exactly.
we're hockey players or they're hockey players. Train inside, eat in. We train inside in the summertime. We're inside a
Hmm.
lot. That would be one big one to get on for sure.
Yeah, man. 100%. Well, dude, teach everybody where they can find you quick, and then we'll let you run.
GVM Performance. That's it. And we have a facility in Chicago and now in Plymouth, Michigan. So
Love it.
that's where we're at. Yeah, GVM Performance.
Well, Gally, it's been a pleasure. Players tuning in, anybody tuning in, even if you're like a corporate individual, you can take from this. Like, it's no different. You might not need as much volume and demand as, let's say, somebody who's training for a sport, but I know that there are a lot of corporate execs that tune in who are, marathon runners and all that kind of stuff. So there's something everyone can take. So everybody, thanks so much. Sorry for tuning in. Gally, thanks so much for coming on. And again, we'll have you back on probably towards the off season, because I think you could give a pretty good overview of what players got to get done, man.
Best part of the year for me.
That's it, brother. Have a good one.
All right, you too, bud. Thank you.